It's been a rough decade. It's been a rough couple decades for EMS, to be honest, but the past decades had a lot of challenges. People don't trust in your judgment. If people don't trust in that, you're going to do what you say you're going to do, why would they have any trust in your leadership? My primary role on a day-to-day basis is essentially defend the contract and defend our workers and make sure that people are treated fairly and have a job at the end of the day.
I have today with me James Monk, president of the Austin Travis County EMS Association. He's been through a lot of leadership. You were in the military, and you lived a life that I think is quite impressive. Before we get into leadership, what do I need to understand about your early context to understand who you are today?
Understand who I am. Well, like you said, I'm president of the Austin EMS Association. Been here for, just hit my 9-year mark. And then before that, I was a combat medic for a few years in the Army. And, ended up deploying to Afghanistan. And really, I think a lot of, where I get my context for, what I think is valuable in leadership and leaders in general. Unfortunately, I see and have seen what not to do. And what has, for me as a person who was in the field for 8 years, I tell a lot of people that didn't have much of an imagination. I got out of the military and was like, hey, I'm going to keep doing the same thing. I'm still going to be a medic, because I really do enjoy this work and I like what we can do to impact people's lives. But yeah, being out in the field, and especially, it's been a rough decade. It's been a rough couple decades for EMS, to be honest, but the past decades had a lot of challenges, and just as well as anybody else going through the different winter storms, I was there first day of Uri, just kind of seeing the shortcomings that we all experienced that day, and throughout that week, when it comes to not only departmental readiness, city leadership, but even state leadership at some points, right? And just kind of seeing like, hey, what kind of burden those decisions place on the people on the ground. And I think that's really where I kind of try to that's where I ground myself. How is this decision going to have a downward effect on the rest of long-term effect on the people that are doing the work, essentially.
When did responsibility first show up in your life?
Oh boy, I mean, I've always kind of had a little bit of responsibility. So I'm the oldest child, and so right off the bat, you are, at least in my household, if you're the oldest kid, you're responsible for your siblings, right? You're making sure that they're doing what they're supposed to do. You're helping out your parents around the house, trying to make sure that things are running smoothly and looking out for your siblings. And so that's kind of how I grew up, and so I'm kind of used to just kind of leading the little group and being like, hey, this is what we got to do. We got to keep on track, and and then obviously I joined the military, and this is why I explained to a lot of people is the military has a little bit of a different perspective on leadership, and you can attest to that as well. It's essentially they tell everybody, hey, you're a leader in your own right. You're either a leader of yourself, you're a leader of your team, you're a leader of your squad. Like there's we have this very like small teams dynamic that works from the very base and all the way up to the top. And I think that's one of the reasons why we have such, effective leadership in our military for the most part, right? Now, no place is perfect, but also seeing those failures within that realm where we have a pretty set out structure, and we have a lot of training behind the leadership, you still have failures, right? Because you're not always going to hit the mark, and not everybody is entirely fit for a leadership role, even no matter how much preparation you give them, right? But for the most part, I think people, they take that training, they take that experience, and they run with it. And so I think that's really like my first couple of experiences with responsibility is, being a medic pretty much in the middle of nowhere, and you're responsible at the age of 19 for, over 60, 70 people and their health and well-being.
Yeah, I bet that could be a lot.
It's pretty crazy, now that I look back at it, I'm like, I don't know if I would put somebody else in that situation, you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I get that. I'm the first child too, so like I totally understand the older child syndrome. Like in my family, it was just like our rule is always, you take care of your brother, do this, do that. I get it. I get it. Is there anybody that influenced how you think?
One of the first people that really had a real impact on me as far as their leadership style and who they were was actually my platoon sergeant with my first unit that I was assigned to. I'm at the Second Stryker Cavalry Regiment, and his name was, we called him Sergeant G because none of us could pronounce his last name. But he was just very, guy was very short, but he'd seen some stuff, right? And so he was a very short guy, short of stature, very calm, very quiet. But even though he, kind of the antithesis, right, of what you would think of as like a macho military leader guy, right? But he still, commanded respect in any room that he walked into, and it wasn't because he was full of bravado or like bigger than everybody else or anything like that, but it's because we all knew that he cared about us as people, and he wanted to see us grow and be better, but he also held us accountable. You never really, like, you felt bad when you let Sergeant G down, right? You wanted to be the person that he saw, that he saw you to be, right? And so I think I took a lot of value out of his leadership, and then also in this department too. I've had a lot of good leaders, out in the field, and I've had a lot of good commanders and folks that just kind of like gave me support and believed in me even when I was like, not really sure if I'm believing in myself right now. And so a lot of good folks here, man. That's really why I do this.
I do. I think we have a great, especially in Austin, we have a really good sense of community. It could always get better. There's always problems and tribulations that we have to get across, but I think that's everywhere.
Yes.
How do you think that early context, everything that we just talked about, shaped who you are now as a leader? You kind of mentioned it a little bit with Sergeant G, but is there anything in particular that stands out as in like, because of this, I want to be this type of leader?
Yeah, I think it's really it's putting your people before yourself, right? I think we have that's something that causes a lot of issues with people's trust in leadership, I think. And I think that is like the most valuable and core, thing that you have to have in order to be effective. If people don't trust in your judgment, if people don't trust in that, you're going to do what you say you're going to do, why would they have any trust in your leadership? That doesn't make any sense, right? And so I think him being able to display like why we can trust him, right? Because it wasn't a way that, you come across as, like I said, not like a blowhard, not, coming down hard on people, not always choosing the stick over the carrot, but trying to find a way that the people can want to contribute more to the team and try to like be bigger than themselves and be part of something that's bigger than themselves, and how you kind of inspire people to do that. And his leadership was a good example of that. And like I said, I had a lot of folks as I was coming up that have kind of shown me that if you focus on taking care of your people, then you're on the right track, essentially.
Yeah. When people hear your title, president, association president, I think they think authority, leadership. What does that leadership actually feel like when you're sitting in between the street level provider and administration? Because you're kind of representing both sides.
To a degree, I guess. So what I try to tell people, I'm not really one that places a lot of emphasis or value on titles, to be honest. And so that's kind of obviously strange, maybe coming from somebody that's stepped into this role, but it just doesn't. I'd still be doing similar work whether or not I was president or not. The reason I stepped into this role is because obviously we had somebody that had been in the role for a long time and was moving on to other things, and I'd been here for, I've been involved with the union for a long time, and I really wanted to see it, continue to be successful and grow and develop as an organization. And so my priority is always going to be our members. It's always going to be our medics and our field folks. It's a difficult balance to strike sometimes when you're trying to be fair and reasonable while you're also someone like me that's spent most of their time in the field. So you have a certain perspective and maybe a little bit of a certain cynicism towards management that I've had to manage, right? I've had to determine whether or not I'm assuming intentions or whether or not I'm actually giving some space to actually have a collaborative and productive conversation. But ultimately, at the end of the day, my job is to represent our members fairly. That includes people all the way up to division chief, right? And people sometimes don't understand that. So there's this balance between making decisions that are going to benefit the majority, but you also have to balance and be considerate of people that are part of smaller groups within the department too, because all these decisions that are placed in my lap do have an effect on everybody, and so you can't always just be like, well, this is going to benefit the majority. Everybody in common is going to be disadvantaged because of it, or you know what I mean. You still have to you gotta kind of play that balance. But for the most part, I try to weigh in how things are going to benefit the most amount of people, essentially.
What do you think people misunderstand about the role, since you're kind of in the middle space?
Yeah.
Field might see you as corporate, and then corporate doesn't see you as corporate. They see you as field. Is there any misunderstandings from either one? And my biggest questions out of this, is it lonely?
So that is a good point. I want everybody in the membership to know that at the end of the day, I was a field guy for 8 years. I understand the struggles, and my priority here is to the working conditions, work-life balance of our medics, right? And so I do feel pressure. I get what you're saying. I do feel pressure kind of from both sides to a degree, but the majority of the pressure is trying to do what I know is right and try to do what is right for our folks, and then coming up against a lot of, like you said, just kind of corporate mentality, right? That kind of comes with how our government is structured here in Austin. Also just kind of has to do with work culture in general, I think, around here. And so I do feel a little bit of pressure sometimes to be like, hey, I'm trying to be reasonable, and I'm trying to make something happen, and the compromise isn't something that I'm 100% behind and I'm really excited about, but I realize that even the compromise is an improvement on what we have. And I'll point out a perfect example of that is the rest schedule. It's not something that happened overnight. It is something that we, this was a year-long plus process to try to go back and forth the department and work out all the different, hang-ups and kinks that were involved in that and putting that together. And at the end of the day, there were some compromises that we ended up making that I wasn't really super thrilled about, but I realized if we didn't kind of cut back, or we didn't kind of make some of those compromises, then we would just have nothing, and we would still be trying to go back and forth deliberating about a perfect process rather than being able to move forward with a good process and improve on that. And so that's really, I think, the biggest pressure that I feel from management is trying to find some kind of way to make things happen without having to go to the media, without having to go to contract negotiations. And that's really the main role I see through the workforce committee, is trying to just do these back and forth conversations and telling people, especially at the executive level, hey, this is what the field is experiencing. Y'all might have this intention for this policy or this procedure or whatever you're doing, but this is how it's actually affecting folks, and this is how we think y'all could tune that up a little bit to make it a little bit more employee friendly. And that's really the struggle with the being in between. But yeah, and if that kind of is, and to your question about being lonely, it can be, right? There are things that I kind of have to keep to myself, and I can't really talk to a whole lot of people about. Not because I'm trying to be secretive or anything like that, but because I don't think people want their personal issues being blasted out to the department. So that's my primary role on a day-to-day basis, is essentially defend the contract and defend our workers and make sure that people are treated fairly and have a job at the end of the day once they get through these different disciplinary and clinical processes.
Just for the people listening that are not in Austin EMS, the rest schedule is something that Austin Travis County EMS does for the providers on the field. It's a way to provide some rest every night so that they're not just running stand-up 24s, being up for 24 hours straight. So for somebody that's not in Austin, that at least they have some context into that.
That's a good clarification, yeah.
So kind of switching gears a little bit, morale gets talked about constantly in high pressure jobs and organizations. From your perspective, what actually erodes morale and what does it the fastest?
Yeah, something that I've brought up recently I've been bringing up pretty consistently since I've moved into this role, but re-emphasizing it again more recently is I think the lack of support with continuously growing expectations causes an imbalance, right? And so right at the basis of that, you have, we're always, our folks in the field are always taking on more, right? We're always doing, we're adding something to their plate. There's another priority from the department or management or whatever that we're supposed to check the box off on, right? Which is good. I think there's nothing wrong with having high standards, but at the same time, you have to give people the tools to be able to effectively meet that standard. And I think something that not any one individual's fault, but as a system, and I think even as an industry, we're failing to provide people with the tools to do what we're expecting them to do. We're, asking people to do stand-up hours, but that's not sustainable. That's why we need people to be able to get rest. And we're expecting people to continue to want to improve and become better clinicians and better providers, which is fantastic. But you have to be able to support that with training and and not just watching a video once a month or twice a month, but hands-on training. Working with your teams. Right? We want people to be better leaders. We want people to be able to make better decisions as leaders, but we don't provide the tools for what the standard is, what the expectation is. We don't provide any kind of leadership academy currently, and so that's something that I've been really pushing for, because I think it would benefit our captains. I think it would benefit our commanders, our division, like all the way up. If we could start getting something that's a little bit more structured, which kind of blies into the team, small team structure that I was talking about before, because every time you move up in a rank and you moving into a position of higher authority in the military, you have to go through some kind of leadership training so that you're prepared for that role. And so I think that would be something that would be beneficial to kind of reverse that. Another thing that, like, as far as eroding morale, though, it's like, I think it's just feeling like you're a replaceable cog in the machine. I think when people start to feel like that, it really just kind of erodes your investment into a department, anywhere that you go. It doesn't have to be in EMS. It could be any place. We see it in the military as well. And once you start feeling like your leadership doesn't really care, it doesn't really matter if they do. It doesn't matter about the intent. You have to actually get at that core issue of, like, just feeling like you're just another number, and it doesn't matter your feelings about how this place or any place are run. Once you start kind of feeling like that, it'll erode your morale. And then I think one of the key issues that erodes morale is that you have the words aren't matching the intent, or the words aren't actually matching what is actually happening. So you can say, we care about your morale, we care about your mental health, we care about X, Y, and Z. But if you have words of support and you don't follow it up with actions of support, people pick up on that, and I think people will start to see a lack of integrity behind those words, whether it's intended or not. And I think that's what kind of creates a disconnect from people who are in management positions, and the field, and people that are on the ground doing the work.
Yeah. When I was talking to Dr. Tanya, she mentioned something interesting, that a lot of times morale, especially, is seen in people that are vested, people that have been in departments for about maybe 10, 15 years. And then they see new kids coming in, or new people, and they see it more as a transitional space versus this is where I want to have a career and grow and finish. That it actually creates more morale issues for the people that are vested, because they care about the department. They want to see it grow. It's almost part of their family and their being. And then there's all the other factors with overtime, lack of overtime, working, being stressed, that actually creates more of a morale issue with the older folks versus the newer folks, because the newer folks are I'm here to get the resume, to go to medical school, to go to PA school, or to do something else. And it was very interesting the way she worded it. Kind of moving on to the kind of like decision making. I think leadership often means making decisions where there's a lot of trade-offs. How do you approach decisions when no one gets what they want? Not everybody gets what they want.
That is a challenge. Again, it goes back to the philosophy of trying to do the most good for the most amount of people. And that's really what I try to lean on, right? And again, you get into the weeds of, there's smaller groups that you want to also benefit. But the benefit with that, the trade-off with that, is that when you're talking about smaller groups within the department, it's a lot easier to, I think, make positive changes for those smaller groups, because it doesn't have as much of an impact to the system as a whole, right? And so we almost have more challenges getting systemic changes implemented, changes that are going to benefit the majority, just because of the scale, essentially. But that's where I really try to prioritize. I try to, look at it as, is this going to benefit? How is this going to benefit the majority of the members? That's the first question. B, is it feasible? Is it something that we can actually do, or are we investing, a lot of resources, a lot of time, in something that we could better spend those resources in time somewhere else? We're a pretty lean crew over here on the association side of things. It's me. Houston's our full-time legal counsel, and then We have 2 part-time lobbyists at the city level help us try to navigate budget and stuff like that, and then everybody else is a volunteer that we're able to use a kind of small amount of leave pool to get them to be able to have the time to actually do things.
To do it.
So yeah, but yeah, that's really kind of how I look at it, is like, what's the cost as far as like, manpower, as far as time commitment, and then how many people is it actually going to benefit? And if the answer is, we can manage the resource costs, we can manage, the time commitments, all that kind of stuff, and then also it's going to have a pretty big widespread benefit to the majority of the people, then I think that's a good pathway to go down.
So, you made the decision, you can't give everybody what they want.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it could be unpopular for a lot of people that don't like the idea. How do you personally manage negative criticism that comes with that?
I mean, that's something that I've had to work on. I'm not going to lie. I've gotten to a point now that I really focus on my relationships and my interactions with people in the department on a regular basis. And most of my interactions with folks, most of my conversations with folks, they're positive. They're good. Even if people don't entirely agree with a direction that, maybe I've taken or the association's taken in the past, I can have a friendly conversation about it with, I'd say, 90% of people in this department, right? And I take another thing from it too is, credit can be good, but it has to be the right kind of criticism. So constructive criticism, 100%. It's saying, this is something that I don't think that you did very well. These are some ways that I think you could probably improve on that. I'm totally 100% open to that kind of criticism, because that can be very valuable, right? You need other people's perspectives to kind of weigh in on what you're doing. Otherwise, you just become, arrogant, narcissistic, leader, and that's not good for anybody. But when I know that I need to maybe just filter it out a little bit, or maybe not engage as much, and it's something I've kind of had to learn a little, to manage a little bit better, is destructive criticism, which is obviously the opposite of constructive criticism. It's criticism that doesn't have a solution behind it. It's just criticism because you don't like how something's going. You feel like the intent behind something was something different. And so what I kind of encourage people who kind of hold some of that like destructive criticism, ask some questions, because you might be surprised about what the actual intent is behind some of these decision-making processes. But yeah, that's how I've been trying to kind of filter through it. I try to focus on what people tell me that I could do better and have a solution behind. And I also try to learn, like, not see failure as just like, oh, this big terrible thing, right? Failure is just a part of life. I've been around long enough to finally get that lesson learned. And so the silver lining for failure to me is that you still learn things. I actually learn more things from my failures than I have ever learned from my successes. And that's the silver lining that you can take, is that you can learn how to do better when you're faced with the same circumstances in the future. And that's kind of what I take from it.
Yeah, I get that, man. Looking forward a bit, what role should organized labor play in shaping the future of leadership in EMS?
That's a really good question. And I've thought about it a lot. I think about it a lot, actually. I think the real purpose of organized labor is to kind of push back against some of this performance-based, performance-focused culture, right? That kind of contributes to that mindset of, I'm just another number, I'm just another cog in the machine, like nobody really actually cares, right? And I think it's our role to push back against that, and to try to center things a little bit more around people, and creating a more people and teaching focused culture, where, granted, we understand that we're not going to always get everything that we want, everything that we are asking for, but there's definitely some compromises, and there's definitely some improvements that we can make that just make sense for both, not only the department, but especially the workers, because we know that our folks face a lot of challenges, right? And that other industries don't. And this is, like I said, it's an issue that spans more than just our industry, as far as just feeling like you're another cog. But our industry is, I think it's even more, highlighted just because of all the stress that people are facing, sleep deprivation, mental health issues that folks face, just the demands of the job. I think just make those a little bit worse. And so you need to have a culture that's a little bit more focused on people, focused a little bit more on not so much the stick, but maybe a little bit more of the carrot, and working on trying to give people the tools so that if you have an expectation, that they can actually fulfill it. And I think all that kind of plays into developing a better culture. As far as the next generation of EMS leaders, I think we're already kind of starting to make those strides. The tuition exemption, that's kind of where my mind goes with that, right? I see that as an opportunity not only to give people the ability to have more opportunities to, improve themselves, professional development, that sort of thing, but, maybe it'll give, the next generation the opportunity to maybe step into another role where they have a little bit more knowledge and education, and they can, get on, some of these higher positions up in government, or they can, start helping us kind of develop what the lobbying arm of EMS, essentially, because we're just this essentially EMS just has all these little organizations like all over the country, and we all have similar goals, but we don't talk to each other, and it's not organized very well. And so I think that's one of the main that's something that's kind of holding us back from really getting all the resources and everything that we need to make EMS a lot more tenable of a career, I guess.
You think labor organizations, or how do you think labor organizations can influence leadership culture in like a constructive way?
I think with workforce, I think the workforce committee is kind of a good example of that. It's essentially, for people that don't know, or maybe are out on the or aren't in the department, essentially we've established this committee where every couple of weeks we have folks from our workforce that meet with members of management. And we just basically bring up through those meetings anything that you can really think of. A lot of the issues recently have been kind of around scheduling issues and like on-call pay and stuff like that. But it really is just a grab bag of any concerns that come from the workforce, and having that conversation with management and just kind of laying out our concerns and trying to find some kind of middle ground and some kind of collaboration on how to fix that without having to be like, well, we're going to get this in the contract so that we make sure instead we're kind of having just an influence on policy, and that's just a continuous process, which I think is beneficial. That's one way that we can have an influence on it. And I think another way that we can influence it is just how we run our organization and how we develop our own leaders within our organization, and how they kind of show up for people, whether it's in the field or whether it's as association reps. And so trying to offer. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and trying to offer our folks the ability to kind of have those resources and have that foundation to, be good leaders moving in the future and think about the people first kind of aspect of it.
What would a healthy collaboration between administration and the labor union, how would that look like if you could have a perfect situation?
Perfect situation. It's going to require, a perfect situation requires mutual respect. It does require a certain level of mutual trust, that, each side is discussing, whatever issue in good faith, and it's mutual accountability. So if we get to a point where we develop, a policy, or if we develop whatever we have to do to move towards a goal, once that has been put in place, both sides hold up their end of the bargain. And we've seen a little bit of a hiccup in some of those conversations, but I think for the most part we've had a lot of good forward progress. It's just that there are a lot of issues, and so there's only so much that we can kind of mitigate with volunteers and on a bi-weekly schedule. And so I think if I had it my way, we would have more full-time people working for, on the side of labor, and we would have maybe some people that have more professional development and training and stuff like that to be in those roles, so that they can kind of navigate the negotiation aspect of collaboration. Because at the same time, like a lot of the times I feel when we're in these talks with management, they ultimately hold more of the cards, even though it is a collaboration. And so sometimes conversations can just get shut off because, well, that's just not feasible from their end, or they don't see a solution. And so I wish that there would be a little bit more open-mindedness towards some things. Like one of the things that I would point out is, like, I'd like to have more time for people to get rest. That's a huge thing, right? But all the different barriers that are kind of put in front of that from management, from the city, and I'm not even going to say that they have bad arguments. I'm just going to say that I feel like there's part of the picture there that's being missed, and that's why I'm not going to get my whole way, but we're not always going to, and I understand we're not always going to get our way, but I just wish that we had a little bit more sway on our end, and it was more of a 50-50 rather than a 75-25 kind of situation.
If the ideal situation is 100%, what percentage would you say you guys are at now?
I would say we're getting better. We're getting closer to. I don't think we're ever going to get to a 50-50 split. Well, I don't want to say never. I'd say we're probably like a 70-30 split right now, where the department management still has overall the majority of the say in how things play out, but we still are able to kind of put in our opinions and our influence.
If you could decide a leadership pipeline for EMS, what would that include?
That's a really good question. What I think would work well is we adopt a little bit of the military mindset, but not so much. I know that we try to do like we've tried to do the paramilitary academies in the past, and that wasn't overall well received, and so we've kind of moved in a different direction, which can be good, but I think that is valuable if you also bring along with it the small team building dynamics. And so like you start from, you bring a medic in, and it isn't, listen to obviously you want to listen to the people who have more authority and have more experience, right? If that's going to be beneficial, but at the same time, you want to give people and empower people to feel like they can make decisions without having to ask permission. And so, and just outlining what that is from the very beginning, like, hey, as a medic, this is your role. This is your leadership role. You are, in charge of X, Y, Z. I would say, for a medic, you should be taking ownership of your truck. You should be taking ownership of your station just as much as your CS partner or your captain partner, because you should feel like you have ownership in that. So kind of start from there. And then for the people who are a little bit more senior in the medic rank, having them essentially mentor people who are newer in that rank, and just kind of laying out like, hey, here's the expectations. This is what you do to be a good partner. This is what you do to be a good, just be a good leader for your role, and flesh that out for every single rank. CS is the same thing. Like once you move into that rank, you're essentially the leader of that ambulance, right? You're the leader of your truck, and kind of fleshing that out and determining like what that looks like, and just kind of moving up from that. I think if we had captains that had a little bit more of a like middle management supervisory role, I think that would help a lot. It would make it so that people are maybe a little bit less hesitant to ask questions. People seem a little bit more comfortable around captains, but maybe that's just because we haven't utilized them a lot for supervisory roles. But maybe I don't know what the reason is for that dynamic. But that's kind of how I'd flesh it out. It's just like have something at every single rank where, hey, here's the expectation. This is what you should think of as far as what your role as a leader is. And one of the best things that you can learn as a leader, I think, is that taking advice or taking feedback or actually getting other people's buy-in is a huge part of being a leader. It's not just, oh, you're in charge, you're the leader, it's my way or the highway. That's not the most effective way to do things. Yeah. And I think if you do that, you can kind of paint that picture with people like, no, you can be a leader, but you can still take direction. And that's how I kind of like structured it.
And again, just for clarification and just so people kind of get what we're talking about, the BLS level, EMT basic, or a paramedic coming into the medic role. So technically the medic role is your BLS provider as credentialed by the medical director in Austin EMS. And then you promote to clinical specialist or CS, and that is your paramedic. You have to be a paramedic and you have to credential at that level once promoted, and you go through a training session. And then captain, it's your FTO roles that can sometimes work higher class as a commando role occasionally, but they're technically the teachers for the trainers for the department, and each one has their own level. But I could see how it would be beneficial to have a BLS or a medic leadership within its own rank, so that way you could create better people for the department, and then vice versa for CSs and captains. So leadership, I think I've been in some positions of leadership, and I have found that they carry a lot of weight that most people don't see. What has it cost you to be in that role?
I don't see it as a cost per se. It is a trade off. I think it all comes with. I learned a lot last year. I'll say this. I learned a lot. Um, and I've learned a lot ever since moving into this role, and it's kind of opened up my perspective on a lot of things. I've had to kind of readjust kind of my overall perception, not only of management, but just how the city and up, right? Just I feel like it kind of opens up the curtains, and you see you see that the Wizard of Oz is just a man, sitting behind the curtain, messing with all the levers, right? And it's kind of what it feels like sometimes. But as far as what the cost is, I think again it's a trade-off, right? Last year I learned that I need to be able to be a little bit more balanced in like my approach generally to my life. And so last year I was focused entirely on this role, entirely on this position, what I could do for it, and I was failing to effectively communicate and delegate to members of my team, and also communicate to the membership on some things too. And so that kind of put me in a hole, right? And once I realized, I was like, oh man, this is quite a challenge. But then I hadn't been paying attention, and so like I hadn't really been spending the same amount of time as I'd had with my family. I hadn't really been focusing on my personal and professional goals as much, because I was so kind of just focused on fixing kind of the problems as they came out. And so I think that was a cost, or I guess a trade-off, that I made. And looking back, I think ultimately it was for the greater good. Now that I know that that's the case, and we still have more things on the horizon that we're going to have to tackle, I'm switching up my style a little bit, and so I'm trying to delegate a lot more to my team, so we can accomplish a little bit more without me having to take on every single issue. So I think that's been a good thing so far. And then just trying to be more communicative. So really, it's a balance between like, how much are you willing to sacrifice for as far as your personal life and your family life for the role. And I have a certain limit. I have a boundary, and I was crossing it a lot last year. So now I'm trying to like really remain within my boundaries, so that I can have more longevity for the role, basically.
How do you protect your sanity when all that stress and all that stuff comes your way? How do you keep your clarity? How do you protect it?
So, well, I go to therapy, right? I'm, not ashamed to say that. It is very beneficial, and I'd recommend that everybody who is in this field at least talk to somebody. But I would really suggest talking to a professional, at least on a somewhat regular basis, just so that you have somebody to kind of bounce your feelings off of. You don't have to get into any of the nitty gritty details if you don't want to. You can take it at your own pace. But I think that's really something that helped me quite a bit. Just kind of learn how to better self-regulate, better take on challenges, and just kind of better control my own mindset. Because if you can't control your own mindset, then you're not going to be able to make any kind of positive change whatsoever. Really kind of avoid being cynical. And so I'd focus on what I can do. I focus on what I actually have control over, and I try to put as much effort into what I can control and try to focus on that. Because failure is easy, and it's also inevitable, but nothing worth doing is easy.
Yeah.
And that's just how it is.
When I talked to Tanya Glenn, one of the things that she said is that most people, they start therapy when it's already a shit show. That one of the things that she wishes people would do, it was that they start therapy now, because you don't want it to get ahead of you. You want to work through it as it's happening, so that it doesn't become a kitchen sink full of dishes by the time you get there.
Absolutely, yeah. I kind of think of it as like we should all go to get physical checkup once a year, right? Just to make sure that everything's looking good. We should go to the dentist every 6 months to a year to make sure everything there is going well. People don't really take that same approach for the mental health, and I haven't taken that same approach throughout the majority of my career. And I'm realizing now, like, I really wish I would have, because if I would have a decade ago, I'd have had a completely different kind of mindset and approach to a lot of things. But next best time is today. So yeah, that's what I tell people. Think of it as maintenance for your mental health, because you absolutely do need it in this career.
Especially now, I feel people in high stressful jobs, paramedics, firefighters, nurses, we see a lot of trauma and a lot of stuff that most people don't see on a regular basis. And I know people know this and people talk about it all the time, but it is different when you actually have to live it, and you work a cardiac arrest with a 3-year-old, and you get home and you have to be happy and you have to be a father and a husband, but in the back of your head, you're still worrying about a 3-year-old that just that you had to code, and you had to tell the parents that their kid had passed.
Mhm.
I know I remember I had a couple of calls like that where like it took a while for me to get comfortable with myself because of it, and having a good family life and good offloading mechanisms, whether it be working out, healthy ones, not drinking or smoking or anything like that, but they help out a lot. So I think getting ahead of it is important, especially for people within the fields like ours.
Yeah. And you touched on kind of the other part of that too, I think, is like having healthy and good habits too. And that's, again, another thing that I've been trying, working on for a few years now, because I used to drink a lot. I used to use tobacco. I used to, what I mean? And now I don't really drink a ton. I don't use as much tobacco. I'm trying to be a little bit more focused on being, healthier. And that has had, that's, in my opinion, paid dividends towards just being able to not only cope with the stress of the job, but just it's improved kind of everything, right?
Yeah.
It improves your family life, it improves your personal life, it improves your ability to approach your personal goals. And so I tell anybody, like, yeah, go to therapy and get some kind of exercise routine. It doesn't have to be some crazy CrossFit thing, and you don't have to lift like 3 or 4 times a week and be a
Go walk out,
bodybuilder.
go walk out in the sun for 30 minutes a day, something small.
My son says go touch grass.
Yeah, cut this grass. Ironically, putting your feet on the grass every morning is turning out to be like one of the best things you could do for yourself. Like it's one of the reasons why this podcast, why it exists now, because I've been super focused and super obsessed with healthy ways of dealing with all this stuff. I want to talk to people that can bring insights so that I can learn a little bit more about how to improve those habits, and at the same time share that with everybody else that's listening and watching. With that said, for people listening, for somebody that's listening right now who feels frustrated inside their organization, what is something that they could actually control?
Well, that's up to the individual person, right? But I think we touched on it a little bit with what your routines are, what your practices are. If you want to be more involved on the labor side of things, we're always running committees. We're always trying to get people involved and interested in some of the stuff that we do. So that's one mechanism people can kind of try to have a little bit of a impact on how things happen at work. But then if that's not your cup of tea, because it's not everybody's cup of tea, and that's fine, focus on what you can do at home. Focus what you can do with your family that's going to have
100%,
a positive impact.
100%.
So, and focus on what you can do personally that is going to bring you satisfaction. I think a lot of us, we make this job our entire personality, and our entire, we focus everything kind of around it, and then we forget how to like focus on the non-EMS aspect of our lives, and we forget that hey, we're people and we have interests outside of this world. And I think that's something that is very helpful to kind of just disconnect and be able to compartmentalize.
Yeah. I know in our organization in Austin EMS, but I'm pretty sure it's equal everywhere else because it's a changing world. There's a lot of young professionals out there that are just coming into the business. What is one misunderstanding about change that you think they misunderstand?
That it's not going to happen. Change is inevitable. It's going to happen no matter what. And so really what the goal should be is to make sure that change is positive and it's good and it's, again, a benefit to the majority, and it isn't causing undue stress or issues at work. And so I think if we get into the mindset of change isn't going to happen or we don't want things to change, then we kind of take ourselves out of the conversation, essentially, and we don't get to have any kind of influence because it's just not the world that we live in. Things are just moving too quickly, and there's just too many competing mindsets, and especially in an organization like ours where, we're not privately run. And we have a lot of people that are, technically stakeholders and have say in how we operate. And so we just have to kind of be mindful of that. It's like if things are changing, that's normal. And I know it's not uncomfortable, or it's not always comfortable, and it's not always a good experience. But if we just resign ourselves to not be included in that conversation, we have absolutely no control over what the change looks like, essentially.
Yeah. What should people stop expecting from leadership?
I don't know. It depends on what kind of leadership, I guess. It depends on what kind of leadership. I don't think that we should actually lower our expectations or change our expectations for leadership, but I think we should just be mindful and understanding of the reality that once you get into a certain position, once you get into a certain either executive or above, or even at the city level, there's a completely different mindset, and I believe that there is a mindset of looking at it as a system, and that kind of removes them from the people aspect of things, which is unfortunate. But like I said, it's widespread. It's all throughout. It's just American work culture, unfortunately. And so they're looking at ways to be more efficient. They're looking at ways to optimize things. They're looking at ways to be more frugal. Be more financially responsible, whatever, right? And those are their focuses. And so as long as you kind of understand that that's the mindset that they're coming from, and I doubt that from that level they're ever going to get to the point where they're looking at it on an individual basis. I think that'll make people feel a little bit less like, oh, it's just this place, unfortunately. And that's the reason why organized labor is important, is because we have to push back against that mentality, and we have to remind them and hold them accountable to be like, hey, yes, we understand that you want to be efficient and you want to do X, Y, and Z, and this is your goal and your mission for the system and the organization, but you also have to remember that people are making your organization run, and you have to think about those people first.
So the next part is, I call it the Tim Ferriss wrap up. It's just kind of change them up a little bit to kind of fit our conversation so they're not as heavy. What bad leadership advice sounds good, but is actually harmful?
I don't want to call anybody out, but so something that was relayed to me that I found is, I guess it's person dependent, right? I would say it's lonely at the top is I think a negative. It's not a good sentiment to have as a leader. I think that if you're feeling lonely, then that means you need to be talking to your people a little bit more, and you need to be, and that's not just the people that you're representing. It's not just the members; it's also your team. Because I don't know, for me, that signals that you're putting it all on yourself, and you're not telling anybody else about it. That's just not effective. You're not going to get things done. So, I'd say that's not a great piece of advice that I've heard.
What habit has had the biggest positive impact on your ability to lead?
Honestly, morning walks.
Morning walks?
And kind of, centering myself in the morning. And sometimes I'll think, usually my wife goes with me now, so we just kind of have, we just talk through things about, what's going on, and try to not focus too much on work. But then when it does come down to work, I can kind of bounce thoughts off of her, or where I can listen to something, I can listen to somebody that I respect, kind of give a lecture on how to approach a certain situation that I might be in, anything like that, to just kind of prepare myself for the day, and kind of get myself in that essentially.
That's a good one. You kind of mentioned this a little bit earlier at the beginning, but how has failure shaped you as a leader?
I think it has, like I said before, I learn more from failure than I do from success. And because whenever you're failing, you're trying to find like, hey, what aspects of this did not work? Whereas when you succeed, you're like, okay, cool, it happened. We had a mission, we accomplished it, move on to the next thing. So you don't really sit there and really think about it. You don't really sit in it a whole lot. And maybe we need to do a better job of that. Maybe we need to sit in our success a little bit more. But that's just not how I don't think that's really how people are tuned. And so taking your failure, looking at it and saying, what if I'm placed in this same position again? What could I do better? What are things that I could improve upon? And just owning it, taking accountability for it. Because I think a lot of people, they feel like, if they fail at something, that means that they are at failure. And that's just not how it works. The most successful people that you see in life have failed more times than they've succeeded. And I think that's something that people really need to get comfortable with, because then that makes you more comfortable with taking accountability for it and doing better in the future.
What belief do you hold about leadership that most people disagree with?
I don't know if most people would disagree with this, but that leadership isn't about authority, I guess. It's not about a position or title or anything like that. It's just kind of how you carry yourself and how you approach things. That's why I think about you can set up a mentorship program for people who are medics, or it's not dependent on your rank. It's not dependent on anything else. It's dependent on whether you're wanting to lift other folks up and kind of lead the way, right? That's what leadership is about, and having a mindset and having a goal and being able to kind of communicate that to people and effectively move in that direction. But I don't know if that's an unpopular opinion. I think a lot of folks that maybe aren't in leadership would wish that more leaders would take less value in their titles and their position and all this kind of stuff and focus more on the actual work of being a leader. I guess that's kind of where I stand.
What question do you wish people would ask you more often?
What do you think of this solution?
That makes sense.
I wish people would. I wish people would come to me and be like, "Hey, this is the problem I'm facing, or this is the problem I have, or this is what I don't like. What do you think of this solution?" I think that's a better conversation than just talking about the problem itself.
So, James, I appreciate you being here today.
Thanks, brother.
If somebody that's carrying responsibility in a high pressure role like ours, and then they're listening to this, and they could take one thing away from this whole conversation, what do you hope it is?
Give yourself room to fail. Give yourself some room to fail. Don't expect yourself to be perfect, but listen to the constructive criticism and use it to grow rather than to just take it as like I'm not good enough. Like, no, that might be the case. Nobody's perfect, but use it as a building block rather than something that's tearing you down.
How can people that want to help the association, whether it be from the department or outside the department, how can they contribute?
Yeah, if you're a member and you want to get more involved, we just got our new website up and rolling, so it's austinemsa.org. We've got hopefully all the kinks out of registering for that, so just go up on there, reset your password, get registered. We're going to be using that as kind of like our main messaging board, along with like the email updates, and then we're going to be having some interest surveys coming out for all our various committees within the next couple of weeks, along with the workforce surveys. Share your opinions on the workforce survey. Tell us what you think we should be prioritizing. Give your honest feedback there. And then if you're interested in getting involved with any of the various committees that we got spinning up right now, just put your name in the hat for that. And then as far as people outside of the association, we also have we have a donations link. And so basically that goes to our foundation, which is a 501c3. And through that, we essentially help. Our two primary focuses are on expanding, education access to our members, education and training access. And so we basically provide reimbursement for anybody who goes through their FBC or critical care certification. So we cover the training, we cover any of like the CE requirements, all that kind of stuff, and then we cover the phone frat subscription, just because we want people to be able to have that as a resource. And then the other thing that we do is we have a relief fund. And so if you donate to that, it's essentially going to help folks that may be facing a little bit of financial hardship, or it's going to help to grow the organization through training.
Cool. James, thanks so much for your time. I know you're a busy man.
Absolutely, man. Thanks for having me. It's awesome.
Thank you. You guys have a good day.
Yeah.